The egg had already been cold for 2 days before Arden Cole found it. He had not been looking for it. He had been tracking a wounded ridgeboar through the lower slopes of the Juvara Highlands, kit bag over one shoulder, boots wet from the morning frost. The rockslide that had come down 3 nights ago had changed the whole shape of the eastern slope. Boulders the size of houses sat in new places. Trees had been knocked flat like dry grass. And there, half buried under a shelf of pale stone, was the nest. There was only one egg left whole. The others had been crushed. Arden crouched beside it. He was a veterinarian by training, a ranger by necessity, and a practical man by nature. He pressed his palm against the shell. It was cold. He pulled his hand back. He told himself to leave it. A dead egg on a dead nest on a mountain that had just killed whatever dragon had laid it, that was not his problem. He picked it up anyway. He carried it home inside his coat, pressed against his chest for warmth, feeling slightly ridiculous the entire way. He set it in a wooden crate near the stove and did not tell anyone. He half expected nothing to happen. He mostly expected to bury a small cold creature in the yard by the end of the week. 6 days later, the egg moved. 2 days after that, it cracked. What came out was small enough to hold in both hands, and it was the color of old gold, bright, warm, with a silver belly that caught the firelight and threw it back. It had enormous amber eyes that did not blink for the first 10 seconds, just stared at Arden's face like it was the only thing in the world. Then it made a sound, a small, high sound, like a kettle just starting to heat. Arden said, "Oh no." He meant it. He absolutely meant it. That had been 3 months ago. Now Silla, he had not named her on purpose. The name had just arrived one morning and refused to leave, lived in his barn, had eaten her way through an amount of smoked river fish that he was embarrassed to calculate, and had recently learned that if she pressed her nose against the barn window at exactly the right angle, she could see the lamp in Arden's kitchen. She did this every night until he came out to check on her. She was, by any measure, a dragon. She was also, by every measure that mattered to Arden's daily life, a complete disaster. She knocked things over. She chewed on the corner of his workbench. She had somehow gotten into a crate of colony medical supplies and rearranged them in a way that Arden could not explain. She rumbled when she was happy, made the kettle sound when she wanted something, and went completely, eerily still when she was scared, which was rare but memorable. She also, for the past 2 days, had been holding her left wing at a wrong angle. Arden had noticed it that morning during feeding. It was subtle. She had the wing pressed close against her body, tighter than normal, and when she moved, she shifted her weight slightly to the right. He had reached toward the wing without thinking, just to check, and she had flinched. Not a small flinch. A full-body pullback, away from his hand, amber eyes going wide. He had stopped, held up both hands open, the way you would with any frightened animal. She had looked at his hands. Then she had taken the fish from him and acted as though nothing had happened. He let it go for now. Dragons were resilient. She was probably sore from climbing the beam in the back of the barn, which she was absolutely not supposed to do and did every single day. That evening, Arden sat in his chair near the stove and read through the colony maintenance reports. The eastern slope monitoring data, the ridgeboar tracking results, the usual. Silla had pushed the barn door open. She had figured out the latch 6 weeks ago and walked herself into the house without being invited. She did this sometimes. He had stopped fighting it. She curled herself along the side of his chair, her tail looping once around the chair leg, her head resting near his knee. The golden scales on her back caught the lamplight. She was growing. In 3 months, she had doubled in length and tripled in weight. She was going to be enormous one day. She was going to be a problem in all kinds of ways he had not fully thought through yet. He rested his hand on her flank without thinking. She rumbled once, deep and slow, the way she did when she was comfortable. He thought about Nara, which he usually did in the evenings. He thought about how empty the house had been for 3 years. He thought about the colony council meeting scheduled for next week, and the compact inspector who was coming, and all the reasons why a frontier ranger in a small highland colony should not have a dragon sleeping against his chair. He told himself he would sort it out. Silla's rumble slowed. She was nearly asleep. In the barn later, alone in the dark, she stretched her left wing out just a little. She stopped immediately. She pressed it back against her body. She had understood something in the way young creatures understand things, not in words, but in deep certain feeling. When something was broken, it was taken away. She had heard the sounds from the colony. She had watched the sick animals come in and the ones that did not get better go away in crates, far from here. She would not go away in a crate. She closed her eyes. She kept the wings still. She kept the secret. The Galactic Compact Inspector arrived on a Tuesday, which was exactly the wrong day. Tuesdays were when Galwood Tess held his council meetings in the Longhouse at the center of Juvara Colony, and Galwood liked nothing more than an audience. He was a wide, dry man who had been running the colony's civilian council for 11 years, and he had the manner of someone who believed that every problem had a regulation attached to it somewhere if you looked hard enough. The inspector's name was something unpronounceable in the Vorish language. The colony had taken to calling him Mr. Vell because it was the closest human mouths could get to the first syllable of his name. He was tall, insectoid, with 4 arms that he kept folded at rest, compound eyes that caught light in a way that made him look permanently suspicious, and a stylus he clicked constantly when he was thinking. He had come to assess a report filed with the Compact's Colonial Wildlife Division. Someone, Arden had strong suspicions about who, had filed a complaint that a semi-sapient fauna specimen was being illegally kept in a domestic setting on Juvara's Highland Ridge. Galwood had, of course, volunteered to host the assessment meeting. Arden sat across the table from the inspector with his hands flat on the wood and his face as calm as he could make it. He had done nothing illegal, technically. There was no specific law against a dragon living in a barn. The Compact's classification of dragons as semi-sapient rather than sapient was, in his professional opinion, wrong, but it was the classification that existed, which meant Silla occupied a legal grey space the size of a small continent. She imprinted, Arden said. She had no nest, no mother, no colony. I was the first living thing she saw. Relocating her now would cause severe psychological damage. You can check the behavioral literature. Galwood said, the concern isn't the dragon's well-being. The concern is liability. The concern, said Arden, should be accuracy. Mr. Vell clicked his stylus. He asked to see the animal. Arden brought him to the barn. Silla was waiting. She always seemed to know when something important was happening. She went quiet in a different way, alert rather than lazy, those amber eyes tracking every movement. When the inspector ducked through the barn door, she turned her full attention to him. She did not move, she simply watched. Mr. Vell studied her with the careful, unhurried look of a bureaucrat who had seen many things and was not easily impressed. His stylus clicked. Silla's eyes followed the sound. Her head tilted just slightly, and she made a low sound that was not threatening, just curious, like a question. The inspector went still. He and Silla looked at each other for a long time. Arden watched the inspector's 4 arms shift slightly, the way they did when he was unsettled. Then Mr. Vell looked away first, which was interesting. He filed an observation hold on the way back to the Longhouse. 30 days for the Compact to conduct further review before any relocation order could be issued. It was the least decisive outcome available to him, and it was, Arden suspected, the most honest one. Something had happened in that barn that Mr. Vell was not ready to classify. Galwood was not pleased. He made this clear in the way he always made things clear, by calling an extra meeting. Arden went home. Silla was waiting by the barn window, nose against the glass, watching for his lamp. He lit it when he came inside, the same as always. Her head dropped from the window. He heard her settle in the hay. He brought her the fish he had picked up from the market on the way through town, smoked river fish, the flat kind she liked, wrapped in brown paper. She took the first piece carefully from his hand, and then, for just a half second, she reached for the second piece at the wrong angle, and he saw her freeze. He saw her correct herself, slowly, deliberately. She took the second piece with her head tilted just right to avoid moving the left wing. She chewed and looked at the barn wall like nothing had happened. He looked at the wing. She did not look at him. He looked at her face. She still did not look at him. He said nothing. He gave her the rest of the fish. He told himself it was nothing. Dr. Riva Austin came by that evening. She was the colony's head medic, 50 years old, built like someone who had been doing difficult things in difficult conditions for a long time, and one of the 3 people in the colony whose opinion Arden actually trusted. She came over sometimes with no particular reason, which was her version of checking on a person. She sat at his kitchen table with a cup of water and talked about the inspection. She talked about Galwood. She talked about the weather moving in from the North Ridge. Then she said, carefully, she's moving differently. Arden said, she's growing. Her gait changes every few weeks. Rivas said, in the specific tone she used when she was not agreeing, but was choosing not to argue yet. She left an hour later. Arden stood in the doorway and watched her go, then looked at the barn. The window was dark. Silla was already asleep. Inside the barn, the wing ached. It had been aching for nearly 3 weeks. Silla had built her sleep position around it, tucked tight, weight off the joint, hay arranged in a specific way that she fixed every night if it got disturbed. She was very good at this. She had gotten better at it every day. 29 days left on the hold. She breathed slowly in the dark and kept herself very still and thought about nothing except being here, in this barn, with the lamp in the kitchen window, where she was supposed to be. Nobody on Duvara argued with the northern storms. You just got out of their way. They came down from the high ridge with no real warning, electromagnetic fronts that scrambled sensors, wind that hit like a physical wall, hail that could crack roof tiles and bruise skin through a jacket. The colony had been building for these storms for 200 years and still lost something every time. A fence, a storage shed, sometimes a tree that had been standing for decades, just gone. This one came in the late afternoon, the sky turning the specific flat grey that old colonists read like a clock. Arden had spent the last hour tying down equipment, moving the smaller animals into the reinforced shelter on the south side, and shouting across the wind to his nearest neighbor to check their water lines. He came back to his own property with his coat soaked and the hail starting. He checked the barn latch twice. He went inside. Silla was at the back of the barn, pressed against the far wall, eyes wide and fully awake. The wind was loud. The whole structure was creaking. She did not like this, he could see that, but she was not panicking. She was doing the same thing she always did when she was scared, going completely still and watching him. He said, "It's all right, it'll pass." She made the low question sound. He said, "I'll stay." He dragged a hay bale against the wall and sat on it. She shifted toward him slightly, not all the way, just slightly. The hail came down harder and the barn shuddered, and she shifted a little more. The crack when it came was not loud. That was the strange thing. The beam along the north side of the roof had been old. He had meant to replace it for 2 seasons, and when the wind came from exactly the wrong angle and something heavy from the yard hit the outside wall, the beam did not break dramatically. It gave out. A quiet, decisive failure. The whole north section of the roof lurched. Stored crates on the top shelf slid. 2 of them went over the edge and came straight down. Arden did not have time to think. He did not have time to move. Silla moved instead. She crossed the barn in 2 strides and threw herself between Arden and the falling crates. She went up on her rear legs, wings snapping out by pure instinct, full extension, both of them, trying to make herself as wide as possible. The left wing opened completely for the first time in 3 weeks. The sound she made was not the kettle whistle. It was not the low rumble or the question sound. It was a high, broken scream that Arden had never heard from her, that he would not forget for the rest of his life. She collapsed sideways into the hay, the wing dragging behind her, and the crates hit the ground where Arden had been sitting and split open against the barn floor. He was already moving. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands out, voice low. She was shaking. The wing was spread wrong, the joint sitting at an angle it was not supposed to sit at, and even in the bad light, he could see the swelling that had been hiding under the scales near the base. Old swelling, long-standing. He had seen it before, in smaller creatures, in different circumstances. He knew what he was looking at. A stress fracture, at least 3 weeks old, beginning to calcify in the wrong position. He sat back on his heels in the ruined hay. The storm was still going outside. The hail was loud on what was left of the roof. Silla was watching him, both eyes on his face, the way she always watched him when something important was happening. Shaking, terrified, but silent, still waiting. He said quietly, "How long?" She did not look away. She made no sound. He said, "You hid this from me." He did not make it a question. Something in her face shifted. She looked down at the barn floor. It was the most human gesture he had ever seen from her, and it hit him somewhere he had not expected. He said, "You thought I would send you away." She still did not look up. The pieces settled into place in Arden's mind. The careful way she had been eating, the sleeping position, the way she had flinched from his hand 2 weeks ago and then immediately acted as if nothing had happened. He had been a veterinarian for 18 years. He had not caught it because she had not wanted him to catch it. She had been protecting herself the only way she knew how, by pretending to be fine. He put one hand very gently on her flank, on the side away from the injured wing. He stayed there. He did not say anything for a little while. The storm moved overhead and the barn groaned, and he just stayed where he was, beside her, with his hand on her scales. Then he got up and found his comm unit under the toppled shelf. Rivard picked up on the second signal. He said, "I need you. Bring the joint kit and the tissue bonder and the portable light rig." He paused. "She's been hiding a fracture. It's bad." Rivard's end of the line was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He said 14. He heard her moving before she ended the signal. He went back to Silla and crouched down beside her head. Those amber eyes found his, still shaking, still afraid. He said very plainly, "I am not sending you anywhere." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she laid her head down on the hay slowly and closed her eyes. He kept his hand on her until Rivard arrived. Word moved through a small colony, the way water moved through dry ground, fast, and everywhere at once. By the time the sun came up after the storm, most of Juvara colony knew that Arden Cole had been up all night in a damaged barn, operating on a baby dragon with a 3-week-old fracture he had not known about. By mid-morning, they knew the dragon had hidden it. By the time Galwood Tess called his emergency council session at noon, people had already made up their minds about what they thought. Arden was not at the session. He had not slept. He was sitting in the barn with Silla, who was sedated and breathing slowly, her wings splintered and wrapped from joint to midspan with the careful, tight binding that Rivard had taught him to recheck every 4 hours. The barn's north roof section had a tarp over it now, held down with rope and old anchor bolts. Rain came through at one corner. He had put a bucket there. Rivard sat on the hay bale across from him and handed him a cup of water and did not tell him to sleep, because she knew he wouldn't. She said, "The wing can heal." He said, "I know." She said, "It will take time. It has to be done exactly right or the calcification sets wrong and she loses the full range." He said, "I know, I'll do it exactly right." She believed him. That was the thing about Arden. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. She had known him for 9 years, since before Nara died, and she had never once caught him in a careless promise. She said carefully, "You didn't fail her." He didn't answer. She hadn't expected him to, not yet. It would take him a while to get there. The council session went poorly for Galwood. He had prepared a full argument. He had the timeline of the injury, the emergency call, the roof damage, the compact hold, all of it arranged to support the conclusion that Arden's situation was unsafe and unmanageable. He presented it to the council with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Then the room started filling up. They came in ones and twos at first. Farmers who had land near the Highland Ridge, the woman who ran the seed storage, the mechanic who kept the colony's water pumps running, the retired surveyor who had been on Juvara since the 2nd generation. They sat in the chairs along the wall and they did not say anything while Galwood spoke. When he finished, the retired surveyor raised his hand. His name was Boran. He was 71 years old, and he had the kind of voice that carried without effort. He said, "My dog hit a broken leg for a week before I found it. I checked that animal every day and I didn't catch it. That's what creatures do when they're afraid of what happens next. It doesn't mean they're not cared for." Galwood said that a dog was not a dragon, and this was not a comparable situation. A farmer said, 3 months ago I had a sick calf. Arden came out at midnight, fixed it, never sent me an invoice." She paused. "I'm not going to sit here and let someone tell me that man doesn't know how to care for an animal." The mechanic said he had seen Silla through the barn window twice. He said she looked at Arden the way his daughter looked at him. He said that was not nothing. Galwood said the issue was regulation, not sentiment. The seed storage woman said, "Then change the regulation." It went on for an hour. Galwood had the authority. He did not have the room. He knew it by the second voice, and he spent the rest of the session looking for an exit that was not there. Mr. Vell, the inspector, had come to observe. He sat in the corner with his stylus and said nothing. At the end, when Galwood had gone quiet and the colonists had mostly said what they came to say, the inspector stood up, 4 arms folded, compound eyes moving slowly across the room. He said that he would be filing a supplemental report with the Compact's Classification Division requesting a full sapience review for the dragon species on Duvara. He said this was based on his own observational data. He said it quietly and without drama and then sat back down. Galwood stared at him. The inspector clicked his stylus once and did not elaborate. That evening, Arden was sitting outside the barn with his back against the wall, watching the ridge go dark when he heard it. He felt it first, a low vibration in his chest, like something enormous had struck a very deep bell far away. Then he heard it properly, a rumble from the mountain, long and slow and deliberate. He looked up. Sura stood on the eastern ridge, at the edge of the tree line where the slope dropped toward the colony. She was massive in the way that the mountain itself was massive, present in a way that rearranged the scale of everything around her. Golden scales, darker than Silla's, gone deep amber with age. She was looking down at the colony. At him. Every person still outside had gone still. Nobody moved. Nobody ran. 200 years of living beside these mountains had taught the colonists at least that much. You did not run. You stayed calm and you waited. Arden stood up slowly. He looked back at her across the distance, maybe 200 meters of open slope between them. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He just stood there and looked. Sura held still for a long moment. Then she opened her chest, that deep resonance coming out full and slow and low, rolling down the hillside and into the colony like a wave. Then she turned and walked back into the tree line and was gone. Rava appeared at his elbow. She had a colony field guide open on her datapad, scrolling through the old behavioral records. She stopped on a page. She read it. Then she said, "HM." He said, "What?" She said, "That resonance pattern. The old records call it a recognition call. It means," she read the note again, "acknowledgement of a caregiver bond. It's usually used between dragons." Arden looked at the empty ridge for a long moment. He said, "Oh." Then he went back inside to check on Silla's wing. The hard part of healing, Arden had learned over 18 years, was the middle. The crisis had its own momentum. You moved fast, you made decisions, you worked. The ending had its own reward, the animal walking out whole, but the middle was just days. Repetitive, careful, unglamorous days where nothing dramatic happened and everything mattered anyway. He exercised Silla's wing every morning at the same time. He started small, a gentle extension of the outer span, not the joint, never the joint yet. He held the wing in both hands and moved it through the angles that Rava had mapped out for him on a printed diagram, which he had taped to the barn wall at eye level. Silla hated it. She was very clear about this. She made a specific low sound that was not the kettle whistle and not the rumble, but something in between, a grumbling complaint that said, "I am tolerating this, and I want you to know that I am tolerating it." He said, "I know, almost done," every morning, same words. She seemed to understand that almost done meant something real, because after the first week she stopped pulling away at the phrase and started waiting through it. Trust, he thought, was mostly built from consistency, from saying a thing and doing the thing you said. He started the formal documentation in the second week. Riva helped him. She brought her notes from the storm night, the surgery record, the behavioral observations she had been quietly keeping for 2 months. He wrote out the sapience argument himself, all 40 pages of it, drawing on 18 years of comparative animal cognition work, on Silla's too loose behaviors, her problem-solving, her deliberate deception of a skilled observer over 3 weeks. That last one was uncomfortable to write. He wrote it anyway because it was true, and because it was also, he realized as he typed it, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the document. Only a sapient creature hid a wound strategically over multiple weeks to avoid a specific social consequence it had reasoned out in advance. He submitted it with the Vorish inspector's supplemental filing attached and 6 colonist statements appended. In the third week, Dory appeared. She was 7 years old, the daughter of the seed storage woman from the council meeting, and she arrived one afternoon at the barn door with the absolute confidence of a child who has decided she is allowed to be somewhere and sees no reason to check. She had red hair and a gap where her front tooth used to be, and she looked at Silla the way most children looked at the most interesting thing they had ever seen. Silla, who usually tolerated strangers at arm's length, went completely still. She watched the child from across the barn. The child walked halfway across the barn, sat down in the hay and said, "I brought fish. My mum said you like fish." She held out a piece of smoked river fish, the flat kind. Silla looked at it, looked at the child, looked at Arden. He said, "Up to you." Silla stretched her neck out slowly, further than Arden had seen her extend toward a stranger, and took the fish. She chewed it. She sat back. The child sat exactly where she was, not reaching out, not crowding, just there. After about 4 minutes, Silla shifted herself 2 body lengths closer and lay down in the hay facing the child. Dory said, "Hello," in a perfectly ordinary voice. Silla made the low rumble. Arden leaned in the barn doorway and thought about what that was going to mean. He brought out the photograph of Nara on the 4th week, in the evening when the lamp was low and Silla was mostly settled. It was a paper photograph, which were rare and cost something on Juvara. He kept it in the inner pocket of the jacket that hung by the door. He had not taken it out in 8 months. He sat down beside Silla and showed it to her. He did not know exactly why. It felt like the right time. He said this was Nara. He looked at the photograph. "She would have thought you were extraordinary. She had better instincts than me about most things. She would have caught the wings sooner." He paused. "She would have been completely unable to say no to you, and we both know it." Silla had gone very still in the way she went still when something was important. She was looking at the photograph, not at his face, at the photograph. He said she died 3 years ago. She got sick and it went fast. I still haven't really." He stopped. He put the photograph face down on his knee. "I'm working on it." Silla moved her head slowly and rested it across his feet. That was all. No sound, no motion, just weight and warmth and presence. He stayed there for a long time. Then, in the 5th week, Sura sent the second dragon. There was no other way to describe it. One morning Arden came outside to find an adolescent male dragon, green gold, awkward, clearly young, clearly lost, sitting at the edge of the property. On the ridge above, Sura was visible for exactly long enough to make the situation clear. Then she left. The young dragon sat in Arden's yard and looked confused and hungry. Arden stood in his doorway for a long moment. He thought about the paperwork. He thought about the far pen, which was empty since the last Ridgebore release. He thought about Riva's face when he called her about this, which was going to be an expression he had not seen from her yet. He went back inside and got his medical kit. He was already talking to the young dragon in the low, even voice he used with all frightened animals before he reached the yard gate, and the young dragon's ears, large, expressive, swiveling like a cat's, turned toward the sound, and stayed there. Silla watched all of this from the barn window, with her nose against the glass. When Arden came back inside for supplies, she made the kettle whistle sound. He said, "Don't start," and she made it again, slightly louder, which meant she was pleased with herself. Dory came by that afternoon. She looked at the young dragon in the far pen and said, "Are we keeping him?" Arden said, "That is a more complicated question than it sounds." Dory considered this and said, "But probably yes." Arden looked at the pen and at Silla in the barn window and at the ridge where Sura had stood that morning. He said, "Probably yes." The ruling came in the form of a 3-page document from the Compact's Classification Division, delivered through the colony's signal station at 6:40 in the morning. Reva read it aloud because Arden's hands were busy. He was in the middle of the morning wing exercise. Silla's left span extended to about 70%, which was the furthest they had reached yet, and he was not going to break the routine for paperwork. Reva stood in the barn doorway and read. The language was the formal, layered kind that the Compact used, dense with subclauses and reference codes, but the meaning was clear enough. Dragon species on Duvara, as a result of a full classification division review, had been reclassified from semi-sapient fauna to sapient protected species. The reclassification was effective immediately. It was the first one of its kind in 40 years. Arden said, "Good." Reva lowered the document and looked at him over it. He said, "She passed 70 today, first time." Reva said, "Arden." He said, "I know, it's a big ruling. I'll read it properly tonight." Silla made the question sound. He brought the wing back in slowly, supporting the joint the whole way, and she rumbled once, comfortable, not complaining. He thought she probably did not know what a compact ruling was. He thought she knew exactly what the word, "good," meant when he said it in that tone, because she had been learning him the same way he had been learning her, daily, carefully, in the specific language of living alongside someone. Galwood Tess did not attend the colony gathering that happened informally that afternoon when the ruling spread and people started coming to the square. Nobody called the gathering. It just happened the way things happened in small colonies. People found reasons to be in the same place. There was food. There was noise. Dory climbed on top of the water storage tank and announced to a crowd of 3 people that she was personally responsible for the whole outcome, which was not true and also not entirely wrong. Arden was not at the gathering. He was filing paperwork. The colony's official record system was old and text-based and required a physical filing at the admin station. Reva came with him. The document he had prepared was 3 pages short by his standards. It was the first formal application for interspecies guardianship in Duvara colony's history. The clerk behind the desk, a man named Wull who had been clerking for 20 years and had seen most things, read through it twice, stamped it, and gave Arden the receipt without comment. Reva witnessed it. She wrote her name in her even, careful hand and handed the stylus back to Wull and said, "Note for the record that this sets a new precedent for the colony." Wull said, "I noted it." The document went into the system as Case 1. That evening, Silla stood on the barn roof. She had climbed up the outside of the far wall, which was the same as the wall she was absolutely not allowed to climb, except that Arden had quietly removed the absolutely from that rule about 2 weeks ago when her balance had come back and her grip strength had returned. She stood on the ridge of the roof in the late afternoon light, golden bronze scales catching the sun, silver belly bright, and she looked out over the colony. Arden stood below. He had not told her to do this. He had not prepared for it. He was just there when she started moving, and he stayed because he understood, the same way he understood most things about her now, that this was a moment she needed him present for. She looked at the open air for a long time. Then she jumped. It was not elegant. Her wings opened, both of them, the left a half-beat behind the right, but opening all the way, and she dropped and then caught, and the glide was short and low, and she hit the ground 25 meters out with her back legs and stumbled forward 2 steps before she stopped herself. She turned around. She made a sound he had never heard before, Not the kettle whistle, not the question sound, not the rumble, something brighter, higher, like she was announcing something. He said, "I saw." She made it again. He said, "I know, come here." She walked back to him with her wings still half open, like she had forgotten to fold them, and she pushed her head against his chest hard enough to move him back a step. He got both hands on the sides of her face and stayed there, and she went still under his hands. He said, "Good girl." Her eyes closed. 3 days later, Sura came down from the mountain. She walked into the settlement in the early morning fully for the first time. Colonists stepped aside without being told, not in fear exactly, but in the careful, respectful way of people who understood that they were witnessing something significant. Sura moved through the colony slowly, not threatening, just present. She walked past the longhouse, past the water station, past the admin building where Case 1 now lived in the colony record. She stopped in front of Arden. He had been waiting outside, because he had somehow known she was coming. In the same wordless way, he sometimes knew things about the mountains now. He stood in the yard with his hands at his sides and looked up at her. She was enormous up close. Her head was the size of his whole torso, and her eyes were old, deep gold, like something that had been watching the world long enough to have no surprises left in it. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Then she lowered her head until they were level, eye to eye, the warm breath coming off her in the cold morning air. She held that position, 5 seconds, 8, 10. Then she turned and walked back up the mountain. Dory, who had appeared from somewhere, said, "What did that mean?" Rivar, who had also appeared, said, "I think it was an approval." Arden watched the tree line where Sura had gone back into the dark of the slope. He said something like that. That night Silla pushed through the barn door and put herself beside his chair the way she always did, her tail around the chair leg, her head near his knee. The lamp was low. The colony was quiet. Outside in the far pen, the young male dragon, whom Dory had taken to calling Flint, which had also arrived and also refused to leave, made a soft sound in his sleep and went quiet again. Arden put his hand on Silla's flank. She rumbled once, slow and long. He thought about Nara. He thought that she had been right years ago when she said that the thing about frontier life was that you could not plan for what you would love. You could only leave the door open. He had not meant to leave any doors open. He had been doing a very good job for 3 years of keeping them closed. Then a cold egg in a collapsed nest had come home in his coat pocket, and a small golden creature had looked at his face and decided he was the first and most important thing in the world, and he had said, "Oh no," and meant it, and done nothing about it at all. He did not feel solitary anymore. He was not sure exactly when that had changed. He had stopped being able to find the moment when he tried to look for it. He decided it did not matter. He decided that the moment was less important than the fact, the simple, plain, daily fact of a lamp in the window and a rumble in the dark, and the sound of something that had been afraid once and was not anymore. Silla breathed slowly against his leg. He said quietly, to nobody in particular, "All right then." The lamp burned low. The colony slept. On the eastern ridge, Sura sat in the dark and watched the small light in a small house on the edge of a world the compact had never really understood, and she made no sound at all. She did not need to.